The night sky had never been so quiet, not a single star pierced through the darkness, as if the heavens themselves had given up on watching. The world below the earth trembled faintly in the distance, and cities burned in a silence that felt louder than any explosion. Mara stood on the rooftop of an abandoned library, staring at the horizon where once skyscrapers had touched the sky. Now only smoke and the faint glow of fire painted the edge of the world. She was 25, her hair matted with ash, her body weak from hunger, yet her eyes still carried something fragile that refused to die: hope. The end of the world had not come with one giant roar, but with a series of whispers. First it was the skies that changed, storms lasting for weeks, then the oceans rising and swallowing coastlines, entire towns wiped away as if erased by a careless hand. Then came the hunger, crops failed, seasons became unpredictable, people fought over scraps of food and water, governments crumbled, and within a few years what had once been called civilization existed only in fragments, scattered survivors clinging to the ruins of what they had known. Mara was one of them, and though she had lost everything, her parents, her little brother, the home she once decorated with posters and books, she still wandered with the question burning inside her: when the world ends, who begins again? She carried a leather satchel, the last gift from her mother. Inside was a worn notebook, pages filled with sketches of plants and small writings about survival. Her mother had told her once that knowledge was more important than food, because knowledge could find food, knowledge could save a life, and perhaps even rebuild a broken world. Mara did not know if that was true anymore, but carrying the notebook gave her a reason to walk, a reason to breathe. The streets below were filled with shadows and silence. Sometimes she would hear the faint sound of footsteps or the distant cry of someone desperate for help. Sometimes those cries ended quickly, silenced by other survivors who had learned that mercy was too expensive to give. Mara moved carefully. She had learned that loneliness was safer than company. Still, loneliness pressed against her chest like a weight. One morning, as she searched the ruins of a half-collapsed pharmacy, she heard a cough, a weak rattling sound. She froze, at first ready to run, then slowly stepped toward it, pushing aside debris. Under the broken counter lay a boy younger than her, maybe 17, his face pale, his lips cracked with thirst, his eyes dull but still alive. He tried to sit up but fell back, coughing again. Mara hesitated. Helping him meant sharing her water, meant risking her life, but something in his eyes reminded her of her brother, the one she had lost. She knelt beside him, lifted the flask from her satchel and pressed it to his lips. He drank greedily, choking, then gasping for air. When he finally looked at her, there was both gratitude and suspicion in his gaze. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice raw. "Mara," she answered. "What about you?" He hesitated, then said, "Elias." From that day they moved together, though trust was a fragile thread between them. Elias was weak, but he had knowledge. He had once studied engineering before the collapse. He carried ideas in his head about building water filters, making fires without fuel, creating shelters from scrap. Mara listened to him, not because she fully believed, but because she wanted to believe. Perhaps Elias could see a world beyond ruins. Perhaps he could help answer the question she carried inside her. Weeks passed. They scavenged together, sometimes finding food, sometimes finding nothing, sometimes running from other survivors whose faces were sharp with hunger and madness. They slept in ruins, taking turns keeping watch. One night, as the wind howled through broken windows, Elias whispered, "Do you think anyone else is trying to start over?" Mara stared at the ceiling, cracked and covered in mold. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe, but maybe the world doesn't want us to start over. Maybe this is the end of everything." Elias turned toward her, his eyes dark but firm. "No, the world doesn't end. It changes, and those who remain have to change with it." It was in that moment that Mara realized Elias carried something she thought had died in everyone else, a vision of tomorrow. But the world was not kind. One evening while they searched through the remains of an old school, they were surrounded, a gang of 5 men and 1 woman, their faces gaunt, their hands clutching knives and broken pipes, eyes burning with desperation. They demanded food, water, anything. Mara and Elias had little, but still the gang did not believe them. One of the men struck Elias across the face, demanding the location of their supplies. Mara screamed, lunging forward, but was thrown aside. She hit the wall hard, pain shooting through her shoulder. It was in that instant that Elias revealed a secret he had been carrying. He pulled from his coat a small metal device not much larger than his hand. The gang laughed, thinking it worthless, until Elias pressed a button and the device emitted a sharp light, a blinding flash that stunned the attackers long enough for him to grab Mara by the hand and run. They escaped into the night, stumbling through alleys until they collapsed in an abandoned church. Mara stared at him, breathless. What was that, she demanded. Elias held the device tightly, as if afraid it might be stolen. It's something I was building before everything fell apart, a kind of energy cell. It can produce light and heat enough for survival, maybe even more. His voice cracked with exhaustion. If I can rebuild it larger, it could mean power again, electricity, water purification, maybe even communication. Mara sat in silence, staring at him for a long time. She had thought survival was the only goal, food, water, shelter, but Elias was thinking beyond survival. He was thinking about beginning again. Perhaps he was the answer to her question, when the world ends, who begins again? Maybe it was him. But in her heart she knew beginnings were never so simple, because hope had a way of drawing danger like fire drew moths, and if the wrong people discovered what Elias carried, they would not see a chance to rebuild. They would see only power to be taken. And already in the shadows of the ruined city, eyes were watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The church smelled of dust and old wood and broken prayers. Sunlight fell through shattered stained glass, painting the floor in fractured colors. Mara sat close to Elias, listening to his breathing, still uneven after their escape. She wanted to ask more questions about the device, about how he had built it and how he thought he could make it larger, but fear silenced her, because if even she knew too much and let it slip somehow, then others would come for it, and she had no strength left to protect him. For days they stayed hidden, moving only at night. Mara gathered scraps of food while Elias worked with trembling hands, sketching diagrams on old hymn sheets. He spoke of circuits and metals and things she barely understood. He said that once upon a time he had dreamed of building machines that could power whole cities cleanly, endlessly, and though the world had ended, that dream had not yet died. Mara listened, and though she did not always follow his words, she felt the fire behind them, and it was enough to make her believe that maybe life was not only about surviving one more day. But word spread, whispers like smoke drifting through the ruins. The gang that had attacked them told others about the boy with the light machine. Soon eyes watched them from alleys and rooftops. Footsteps echoed behind them when they walked. Mara grew restless. The city itself seemed to close around them, as if waiting to devour. One night Mara woke to the sound of footsteps inside the church. Elias was asleep beside her. She pressed a hand to his mouth before he could stir, pointing toward the shadows. Men, 3 of them creeping closer, knives glinting in faint moonlight. Mara reached for a piece of wood and hurled it, the sound echoing through the far end of the church. The men turned briefly, and in that instant she dragged Elias through the back door and into the dark streets. They ran until their lungs burned, until the city gave way to overgrown fields, the ruins of houses swallowed by grass and trees. Here the silence was deeper, broken only by the rustling of leaves. Elias bent over, gasping, clutching the small device to his chest. "We can't keep running, Mara," he said, his voice shaking. "We need to find others, not gangs, not scavengers, but people who still remember who we used to be." Mara wanted to argue, but exhaustion drowned her words. She simply nodded, and together they followed the faint line of an old railway track leading them further from the city. Days passed, the land grew greener, rivers ran clearer, the ruins fewer, as though nature was slowly reclaiming the earth. Then one evening they found them, a group of survivors living near the broken shell of a dam. There were families, children, elders, faces hardened by loss but softened by the fragile peace they had carved out. Elias approached them cautiously, speaking of what he carried, of the hope it might bring. The leader, a woman named Anya, listened with wary eyes, but unlike others she did not lunge to steal it. She asked questions, hard ones. Where did he find it? How could it help? What would it cost? Elias explained patiently, showing them the light, the warmth it produced. Anya touched it with trembling fingers, tears filling her eyes, because it was the first true light she had seen in years. Not fire, not candles, but light that hummed with promise. The people murmured around them, whispers of miracle, of hope, of danger. That night the camp held a gathering. Mara sat by the fire watching Elias speak, his voice steady, his eyes alive in a way she had never seen before. He was no longer just a boy scavenging ruins, he was something larger, a spark waiting to ignite. Mara felt both pride and fear, pride that she had saved him when he was dying in that pharmacy, fear that she might lose him now to the very people who needed him more than she did. But hope is never safe. Within days the same gang that had hunted them reached the settlement. They came with weapons and rage, demanding the device, demanding Elias. Mara fought beside the others. Arrows flew, knives clashed, fire spread through tents, screams tore the night apart. In the chaos Mara saw Elias cornered, the device ripped from his hands, the leader of the gang raising it high with triumph. But in his ignorance he pressed the wrong sequence. A sharp, blinding explosion ripped through the air, throwing bodies across the ground. The gang leader screamed as fire consumed him. The device shattered into fragments, glowing then fading to ash. Mara crawled through the smoke, searching until she found Elias lying on the ground, his body bruised but alive, his face streaked with blood. She pulled him into her arms, whispering, "It's gone, it's all gone." Elias coughed but managed a weak smile. "Not gone," he rasped, "broken but not gone. I can build again if I had time, if I had help, if I had us." The survivors who remained gathered around, faces filled with shock and grief, but also awe, because they had seen what was possible even for a moment, and that memory could not be destroyed. Anya placed a hand on Elias' shoulder and said, "If you can rebuild, then we will stand with you. You are not alone anymore." Months passed, the camp grew stronger. Elias worked with others, teaching them what he knew, drawing knowledge from scraps of books and machines. Mara stood beside him through hunger, storms, and endless labor. She became his protector, his voice when his own faltered, and slowly the ruins around them began to change. A wheel that turned water into power, a field that grew food again, a signal that flickered faintly into the distance, maybe reaching other survivors. Mara watched the children laugh one evening, running under a sky slowly clearing of ash, and she felt the question rise in her heart again: when the world ends, who begins again? She looked at Elias, his hands blackened with work, his eyes still burning with impossible dreams, and she knew the answer. It was not one person, it was not him alone, nor her alone, it was all of them together, broken people carrying fragments of light, building piece by piece a new tomorrow. The world as they had known it was gone, but in its ashes a world of the end was being born, and though Mara did not know if it would last, she knew at last that beginnings were not given, they were made. And so the end was not truly the end, it was the place where someone decided to begin.